If you ever see room 9, keep driving. I almost deleted this recording 3 times. Every time I tried, something happened that convinced me to leave it alone. Maybe that's superstition. Maybe it's guilt. Or maybe saying this motel's name out loud really does invite new guests. Either way, if you ever find yourself driving alone through rural America and you see a roadside motel with a flickering neon sign missing half its letters, don't stop. Keep driving, no matter how tired you are. I didn't. It started after I missed a highway exit somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Rain swallowed the road until the headlights barely reached the next lane marker. My phone lost signal without warning, the GPS froze, and the fuel gauge dipped so low the warning light refused to stop blinking. There wasn't another car for miles. Just darkness, wet asphalt, and the feeling that I had already taken one wrong turn too many. Then I saw it. An old motel sitting beside the highway like it had been forgotten decades ago. The neon sign buzzed weakly, throwing sickly red light across cracked pavement. Half the letters were burned out, but one thing was perfectly clear. Vacancy. If I'd known what room 9 really was, I'd have slept in my car. You'll understand why soon enough. Just remember this before I tell you the rest. By sunrise, I wasn't the same person who checked in. Nobody remembered it. I told myself I was overreacting. People get lost. GPS systems fail. Storms knock out cell towers. There had to be a reasonable explanation for everything that happened after I missed that exit. Looking back, I think that was exactly how the road wanted me to think. The GPS suddenly chimed and recalculated my route without me touching it. Instead of directing me back toward the interstate, it guided me onto a narrow two-lane highway that cut through endless woods. The rain eased into a cold drizzle, but the silence became even stranger. No headlights passed me. No 18-wheelers thundered by. Not even a single deer crossed the road. It was as if every living thing had decided to avoid that stretch of highway except me. I reached for my phone to check the map manually. The battery had been completely full 10 minutes earlier. Now it was dead. No warning. No low battery notification. Just a black screen reflecting my own uneasy face. I kept driving because I didn't have another choice. The fuel needle hovered just above empty, and every mile felt longer than the last. Then, through the mist, I spotted faded red lights glowing beside the road. An ancient roadside motel. The cracked neon sign struggled to stay alive. Pine Ridge Motor Lodge. Several letters had burned out, leaving broken gaps in the name, but enough remained to read it. Somehow, seeing a business at all felt comforting. A place with electricity meant people. People meant safety. I parked outside the office. Warm yellow light spilled through dusty windows. Inside, an elderly receptionist sat perfectly still behind the counter. He wasn't reading or working. He simply stared at an old CRT television filled with hissing static. I cleared my throat. "Do you have a room?" Without looking at me, he answered, "You've already reserved one." I laughed nervously. "I think you've got the wrong person. I've never been here." Only then did he turn his head. His expression never changed. He reached beneath the desk and slowly slid an old brass key across the counter. A tarnished tag hung from it. Room 9. As I signed the guest ledger, something caught my eye. Every name stopped after the first name. No surnames. No addresses. Several lines contained only one chilling word. Missing. The receptionist quietly folded the ledger shut. "Don't leave your curtains open after midnight." He offered no explanation. I carried the key upstairs, telling myself they were just eccentric warnings. Later, I realized they weren't warnings. They were survivor notes. Then I unlocked room 9. Someone wanted me to survive. The hallway outside room 9 smelled faintly of dust and old carpet, but the moment I pushed the door open, something felt wrong. Not because the room looked abandoned. Because it didn't. It was spotless. The bed was perfectly made with crisp white sheets. Floral wallpaper covered the walls in faded patterns that might have been fashionable 40 years ago. A tube television sat on a wooden dresser beneath a lace doily, and an old rotary telephone rested on the nightstand beside the bed. Even the air felt preserved, as though time had stopped moving the instant the last guest walked out. Or never did. I locked the door behind me, tossed my backpack onto the chair, and tried convincing myself I was exhausted enough to imagine the strange atmosphere. Then I noticed the folded piece of paper. It rested neatly beside the lamp, as if someone had left it there expecting me. Across the top, written in shaky black ink, were 5 simple words. For first-time guests. I frowned and unfolded it. Below the title was a numbered list. Rule 1. Never answer if someone knocks exactly 3 times. Rule 2. Ignore children laughing outside. There are no children. Rule 3. The bathroom mirror belongs to another room after 2 a.m. Rule 4. If the television turns on by itself, never look directly at channel 0. Rule 5. Never attempt to check out before sunrise. Rule 6. If room 8 calls, do not answer. Room 8 has no phone. Rule 7. If anyone asks whether you've stayed here before, lie. Rule 8. If you wake up somewhere else, pretend you're asleep. I stared at the page for several seconds before laughing under my breath. I figured whoever wrote this needed therapy. The sound of my own voice bounced strangely off the walls. For a moment, I almost believed the room answered with a faint echo that didn't belong to me. I folded the paper again and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Maybe it was some bizarre prank. Maybe the motel leaned into ghost stories to attract curious travelers. As ridiculous as the rules sounded, they made for an entertaining read. Then someone knocked. 3 slow knocks. Tap, tap, tap. Exactly 3. Every muscle in my body tightened. I waited. Nothing. No footsteps. No voice. Only silence. A cold smile spread across my face despite the knot forming in my stomach. Coincidence. It had to be. I walked toward the door anyway, stopping with my hand inches from the lock. The first rule flashed through my mind. Never answer if someone knocks exactly 3 times. I backed away instead. A few seconds later, laughter drifted across the parking lot. Children. Several of them. Playing. Laughing. The sound was strangely cheerful, completely out of place in the middle of an isolated highway after midnight. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled one corner of the curtain aside. The parking lot was empty. Every parking space. Every walkway. Every shadow. No children. No families. No movement. The laughter continued for another few seconds before stopping all at once, as though someone had muted the world. My smile disappeared. I slowly let the curtain fall closed. Then the television clicked. The screen came alive without anyone touching it. White static hissed through the speaker. The channel indicator displayed only one number. Rule 4. I instinctively looked toward it before remembering the paper. My eyes dropped to the floor. The static continued. Even without looking directly at the screen, I could feel something. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. Against my better judgment, I glanced only at the edge of the reflection in the dresser mirror. Someone stood inside the static. Motionless. Facing me. Not walking. Not blinking. Just waiting. I jerked my head away so fast my neck cracked. The static abruptly stopped. Silence returned. Then I heard a whisper. Open the door. It wasn't outside. It came from somewhere inside the room. Close enough that I instinctively turned around. No one was there. The whisper never repeated itself. I reached into my pocket and unfolded the paper again with trembling hands. The handwriting looked hurried. Desperate. Like someone had written every word knowing they wouldn't get another chance. Only then did I notice something I'd missed before. Near the bottom, beneath Rule 8, another line had been scratched out so violently that the paper had nearly torn. I couldn't read a single word. There was one rule someone had scratched out. I still don't know why, but in that moment, I finally understood one terrifying truth. Someone had survived this place long enough to write those rules. Whether they ever escaped, I couldn't yet tell. Midnight check-in. I don't know how long I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the handwritten rules. Every instinct told me to run, but the empty fuel tank outside and the storm still pounding the highway made that feel impossible. My eyes drifted toward the clock beside the bed. 11:59 p.m. The second hand reached the top. Midnight. Nothing happened. I actually laughed. A quiet, nervous laugh that sounded more hopeful than amused. Then a car appeared, not driving into the parking lot. Appearing. One moment the space outside my window was empty. The next, an old black sedan was parked there as though it had always been waiting. There was no engine, no headlights cutting through the rain, no tires rolling over wet pavement. It simply existed. Then another, a faded pickup truck. Another, a polished station wagon. Another. Within less than a minute, every parking space outside the motel was occupied. None of them had arrived. They had simply become part of the night. Keeping the curtain barely open, I watched in complete silence. Car doors opened one after another. Men, women, families. They stepped out without speaking, without looking around. Each walked toward a different motel room with slow, practiced movements. No one checked in. No one carried luggage except one elderly man wearing a gray overcoat. His leather suitcase was covered with faded airline stickers from countries I had never heard of. One sticker bore the name of a nation that no longer existed. Another displayed an airline whose logo belonged in history books. Every guest looked as though they had walked out of a different decade. A woman wearing clothes straight from the 1940s adjusted white gloves before entering her room. A bearded man in a bright orange shirt and wide-collared jacket looked unmistakably like he had stepped out of the 1970s. Another guest carried a bulky camcorder hanging from his shoulder, dressed exactly like someone from the late 1990s. Mixed among them were modern travelers wearing hoodies, headphones, and backpacks. They never acknowledged each other. They never made a sound. It was like watching strangers obey rules they had long ago accepted. Then I saw her. A little girl wearing a pale yellow raincoat. She couldn't have been older than 8. She stopped halfway across the parking lot. Slowly, she turned her head toward my window. I immediately let the curtain fall. My heart hammered against my ribs. She couldn't have seen me. The room was dark. I had only opened the curtain an inch. After several seconds, curiosity won again. I peeked through the same narrow gap. The little girl was still staring directly at me. She smiled. Then she slowly raised one hand and waved. Every hair on my arm stood up. Her lips moved. She wasn't speaking loudly enough to hear. She was mouthing words. Don't let them know you're awake. Before I could process what she meant, she turned and disappeared into one of the rooms. A minute later, footsteps echoed through the hallway outside. Slow. Measured. Someone stopped outside the first room. A doorknob rattled once. Then the next room. Another handle turned. Then another. Room by room. The footsteps came closer. Metal clicked. Doors trembled gently. The unseen visitor never forced any of them open. It was almost as if they were checking who was asleep. The footsteps stopped outside room 9. My breathing froze. The handle slowly turned. The lock held. The door shook once. Then everything became silent again. The rotary telephone exploded into life. Its shrill ring nearly made me scream. I stared at it until the third ring. Against every instinct, I picked up the receiver. Hello. Several seconds passed. Then a calm voice answered. You're in my room. The line went dead. At that exact moment, the bathroom light flickered on by itself. I looked toward the mirror. My reflection was standing exactly where I was. But it wasn't copying me. It kept smiling. Slowly. Patiently. Its eyes never blinked. Behind the reflection, the number on the bathroom door wasn't 9 anymore. It had changed. 8. I stumbled backward so hard I nearly fell over the bed. The smile remained long after I looked away. That was when I understood the motel wasn't haunted. It was occupied. The highway didn't lead people here by accident. It fed the motel. Every traveler who vanished on lonely roads. Every missing person whose car was found abandoned. Every unexplained disappearance whispered about by truck drivers. They hadn't disappeared. They had checked in. And somehow, they had never checked out. The handwritten rules weren't written to scare new arrivals. They were written by someone desperately trying to leave instructions behind. Somewhere in the hallway hung photographs of smiling guests from decades past. I suddenly remembered something. When I walked upstairs, one of those photographs had looked strangely familiar. I couldn't remember why. Now I knew. One of the faces had become mine. People always say highway patrol avoids certain roads because they're dangerous. Truckers have another name for places like this. They call them the last vacancy. They say maps slowly erase them. Dispatchers lose the signal. Tow trucks never arrive. And anyone who spends the night is never officially seen again. I looked back toward the door. The receptionist was standing inside room 9. He hadn't opened the door. He was simply there. The number behind my reflection wasn't 9 anymore. It was 8. I stumbled backwards so fast that my shoulders slammed into the wall. The mirror version of me didn't react. It kept smiling, its expression widening by impossible degrees while mine was frozen somewhere between panic and disbelief. Then, without moving its lips, it slowly lifted one finger to where its mouth should have been. A gesture for silence. The bathroom light flickered. When I looked again, my reflection was normal. The number was 9, as though nothing had happened. I stood there for several minutes, trying to convince myself exhaustion could explain everything. Lack of sleep, stress, a long drive through unfamiliar roads. Every excuse sounded weaker than the last. The rules hadn't predicted random hallucinations. They had predicted events. Every impossible thing that happened had already been written on that sheet of paper. That realization changed everything. The motel wasn't haunted. Haunted places trap ghosts. This place trapped people. Somehow, everyone who arrived here had reached the highway at exactly the wrong moment. A missed exit. A dead phone. An unexpected detour. A nearly empty gas tank. None of it felt accidental anymore. It felt orchestrated, as if the road itself had quietly steered travelers toward this forgotten building. The highway wasn't leading people past the motel. It was feeding it. Suddenly, I remembered the faded photographs hanging along the upstairs hallway. When I first walked by them, I assumed they were old advertisements or family portraits left behind by previous owners. Now I wasn't so sure. I eased the door open just enough to peek into the hallway. It was empty. The photographs still lined the wall beneath dusty brass lamps. I forced myself to walk toward the nearest frame. The smiling family inside looked ordinary enough. A father, a mother, 2 children. Yet something happened while I watched. The father's face blurred for only a second. When it became clear again, he was someone else. Not older, not younger. A completely different man. I staggered to the next photograph. The same thing. Faces shifted slowly, almost lazily, replacing one stranger with another. Then I reached the final frame. The person standing beside the motel sign wore the same dark rain jacket I had hanging inside room 9. My jacket. My face. The picture looked old, faded by decades of sunlight, yet somehow it already included me. I backed away until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. That's when another memory surfaced. Years ago, while stopping at a truck stop outside Oklahoma, I'd overheard 2 truck drivers arguing about certain highways they refused to drive after midnight. One of them had mentioned a place called the Last Vacancy. The other immediately told him to shut up because roads remember names. At the time, I laughed. Now I understood why neither of them had smiled. People in those professions hear stories. Highway patrol officers quietly redirect traffic after unexplained disappearances. Tow truck operators refuse certain late-night calls. Emergency dispatchers claim radio interference whenever coordinates match forgotten stretches of road. Official maps slowly stop acknowledging places people aren't supposed to find. Not because they never existed. Because someone wants them forgotten. If travelers can no longer find the motel simply finds travelers instead. The room suddenly felt smaller. The walls seemed closer. The silence became so complete that I could hear the ticking of the bedside clock from across the room. Then another horrifying thought settled into my mind. Every guest outside had gone into their rooms. None of them had come back out. No lights. No voices. Nothing. Maybe they were asleep. Maybe that was the moment everything changed. My eyes drifted toward the handwritten rules still lying open on the bed. One sentence echoed in my head louder than all the others. You only become a guest after you fall asleep. I looked at the clock. Midnight had passed. The hands hadn't moved since. For the first time that night, I considered something worse than dying. What if sunrise never came? A faint scent of cigarette smoke drifted through the room. I slowly turned toward the window. Nobody was there. Then I heard a familiar voice behind me. You should get some rest. I spun around. The elderly receptionist was standing beside the bed. The door was still locked. I never heard it open. The bill isn't money. I never closed my eyes again. Every time they grew heavy, I forced myself to stand, pace the room, or splash freezing water across my face. The receptionist never moved from where he stood beside the bed. Sometimes he watched me. Sometimes he wasn't there at all. I could never catch the moment he appeared or disappeared. The clock remained frozen. Midnight. Then, without warning, it jumped. 4:57 a.m. 3 hours had vanished. The receptionist stepped toward me with the same emotionless expression he'd worn since I arrived. In one pale hand, he held a small piece of yellowed paper. A receipt. He silently offered it to me. My hands shook as I unfolded it. There was only one item listed. Room 9, paid. Charge, 1 memory. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because my mind refused to accept anything else. That's it. I whispered. That's the joke. The receptionist said nothing. Then, as suddenly as a light being switched off, something inside me disappeared. I tried to think of my younger sister. I knew I had one. I remembered birthdays, family vacations, the sound of us arguing over the front seat during long drives. But her face, it was gone, completely gone. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't remember her smile, her eyes, or even the color of her hair. Panic hit me harder than anything I'd experienced that night. The motel hadn't asked for payment. It had already taken it. Outside the window, pale morning light finally broke across the trees. The receptionist nodded once. You may check out. When I looked back toward the parking lot, every vehicle was gone. The guests had vanished with them. Even the rain had stopped. I didn't wait another second. I grabbed my backpack, ran down the stairs, and threw myself into my car. The engine started instantly. The fuel gauge, which had hovered near empty for hours, now read completely full. My phone lit up. 4 bars of signal. The GPS calmly displayed the nearest interstate, as if nothing unusual had happened. I drove until the motel disappeared behind the trees. I never looked back. Later that afternoon, I stopped at a sheriff's office and told them everything. The deputy listened patiently before pulling out an old county map. There hasn't been a motel on that highway in over 50 years, he said. Just empty woods. Weeks later, against every instinct, I drove back. The motel was gone. Only cracked pavement remained where the building should have stood. I sat there for several minutes, wondering if grief and exhaustion had finally broken my mind. Then I climbed into my car. Something rested on the dashboard. An old brass key. Room 9. I threw it into the nearest river that same day. The following morning, it was back on my dashboard. That's when I realized something I still can't explain. You don't leave. You just stop checking in. If you ever find it. Weeks passed, but the motel never really let me go. At first, the changes were small. I'd open my wallet looking for my driver's license and find another faded receipt from room 9 folded neatly behind my credit cards. No matter how many times I threw it away, Another one appeared a few days later. Then strangers started recognizing me. A cashier smiled and asked, "Back again?" A man pumping gas nodded as if we'd met before. Neither of them could explain where they knew me from. Neither remembered asking. Google Maps became impossible to trust. Every few weeks, while driving somewhere completely ordinary, the screen would suddenly flash recalculating route before trying to guide me onto an empty highway I'd never intended to take. I always canceled the route immediately. Once, I reviewed my dashcam footage after a weekend trip. For a single frame, barely visible between 2 seconds of highway, the faded neon sign stood beside the road. Pine Ridge Motor Lodge. The next frame showed nothing except trees. I started searching online, hoping someone else had answers. Instead, I found stories. Different states. Different motel names. Different highways. Always the same room. Room 9. If you've ever seen a motel that wasn't on your map, tell me where. I read every comment. Some of your stories have become what I call case files, and one of them might be next. As for the brass key, I still have it. I locked it inside a small metal box years ago. Most nights, it stays cold. But every now and then, usually after midnight, the metal becomes warm. And somewhere, I know another traveler has just missed the wrong highway exit. If your GPS ever says recalculating route on an empty highway, don't assume it's trying to get you home.